Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome. Thank you for rejoining us here at this plenary session on accelerating research, development, and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine, lessons learned from key stakeholders, and of course, we saw how this topic was already on the agenda of our earlier plenary. My name is Natasha Tsopardi-Muscat, and I am the Director of Country Health Policies and Systems at the WHO Regional Office for Europe. Our region is rich in its diversity, with 53 countries in Europe and Central Asia and a population of nearly 1 billion people, stretching from the shores of the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And in our region, as elsewhere in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that coming together for the common good is indeed possible. I think although we do sometimes tend to dwell on some of the more negative stories, the vaccine response that we have seen is proof that fast-track research and development can be a reality, especially when it comes to finding solutions that benefit everyone and keep all of us safe. But today we are here to discuss how we can learn from this experience and transform the way vaccines are developed and distributed. Can we leverage new partnerships and collaborations between industry, governments, and the global public health sector for the benefit of everyone, everywhere? To tackle these and related questions, I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished speakers, both physically present with us here in the room and online, who will guide us through this afternoon's conversation. Dr. Carmen Cabeza, thank you for joining us, is the Secretary of the Public Health at the Department of Health of the Generalitat de Catalunya in Spain, and a specialist in family and community medicine. She has also led a successful vaccination program in Catalonia during the pandemic. Joining us online is Dr. Cesar Hernandez Garcia, who is the head of the Department of Medicines for Human Use at the Spanish Agency for Medicines and Medicinal Products. He brings to this conversation expertise in the areas of clinical trials, regulatory affairs, clinical evaluation, quality, pharmacovigilance, and coordination with the European Medicines Agency. I would also like to welcome Dr. Ken Gasong, who is the director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who will be joining us with a pre-recorded statement. In early 2020, Dr. Ken Gasong was appointed as one of the WHO Director General's special envoys on COVID-19 preparedness and response. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to my colleague, Dr. Sif Malu-Nielsen, Technical Officer for Vaccine Acceptance and Demand in the Vaccine Preventable Diseases and Immunization Unit within WHO Europe. And finally, I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Greg Perry, who is also joining us virtually, and who is the Assistant Director General of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, IFPMA. Greg is leading the IFPMA's Africa Engagement and Alliance Building strategies, focusing on innovation, access to medicines, and regulatory strengthening. And during this conversation, we will first hear from each of our panelists, and we will then open the floor for questions which you should submit through the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen in the app. So for those of you with us here in person, please do send your questions by downloading the Congress app and finding it from the Q&A screen. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Carmen Cabeza, and invite her to take the floor.
Good afternoon to everybody on site and online. Thank you to the organization to invite us to share with you some reflections about what we have learned so far in terms of accelerating translational research, vaccine development and distribution, and utilizing new partnership and collaborations between industries, governments, and global public health actors during this pandemic. First of all, some context. Since March of 2020, there have been 5 pandemic waves here in Catalonia, like the most part of Spain. Spain, as Italy, for instance, has suffered very much during the first wave of this pandemic, and that has increased the risk perception of our population. So an important part of it is waiting, or was waiting, for the arrival of the vaccines. COVID-19 vaccines had surpassed our best guesses in terms of effectiveness, especially for severe disease, for hospitalizations and intensive care units admissions. Although they are using really new technologies as the mRNA platform, they are based in decades of research in vaccine development. Since the beginning, we have explained to health professionals through many webinars with many attendants, and to the population with communication campaigns, press conferences, and so on, that the vaccines are safe and effective, and we share our data in an open way every day, and to all the researchers too. The selection, reservation, and purchase of vaccines is made by the Spanish Ministry of Health inside the European Union acquisition process. The strategy of vaccination in Catalonia, like other autonomies of Spain, follow the Spanish strategy that is developed and agreed by a scientific working group and then approved by a committee integrated by the health ministers of every autonomous community and chaired by the Spanish Minister of Health. The working group is integrated by the technical responsibles of vaccination in each community's autonomous community, some representative of scientific societies, by the Spanish Ethical Committee. The group proposed the vaccination order of all the risk groups, the types of vaccines to be used at every stage, and all the other technical aspects. It's worth emphasizing that since the beginning, the rationale of the strategy has not been changed. The main priority is to achieve a high vaccination uptake in most vulnerable people, especially the people living in nursing homes, the elderly people, and also the people with high-risk conditions. As vaccines arrived scarcely at the beginning, the process of vaccination was stepped, and the groups were included in the vaccination with a specific time schedule agreed for all Spain. Catalonia, as the rest of Spain, has an almost universal public health system, especially primary care with decades of experience in vaccines. At the same time, hospitals play a very important role in the care of the people with high-risk conditions and work in many places with a strong relationship with the community, with the primary care. We focus our work in making very easy to the population to get vaccinated, trying to have many vaccination sites in all the country, working many hours a day, all days of the week. We send SMS to all the population that is called to be vaccinated, but many other strategies to achieve high coverage have been implemented, like phone calls by their health professionals, remind alerts in their medical records. We have been working together as a team, public health, the Catalan Health Service, the providers, both at a centralized level for all Catalonia and at territorial level. We have put a high political priority in vaccination. Everybody knows that the first months of this year, COVID-19 vaccination has been the top priority, and all the health system has been dedicated to that. Important economic resources has been dedicated, for instance, to pay extra wage to nurses and administrative staff at the vaccination sites. The population of Catalonia is very diverse, with more than 14% of migrant population, and we have to make specific materials for them in different languages and addressing their main fears. Vulnerable people is often have to reach, as homeless people, for instance. In order to arrive to them, we have worked with NGOs like Red Cross. Young people perceive COVID-19 as a not very important disease, and we have to work with that. Since the end of December 2020, we have administered more than 11 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine in an unprecedented effort of all our health system and also of all our society. That have implied many people in health and social services, and that was a big success for us. More than 85% of all the eligible population is fully vaccinated. And we have avoided many deaths, many hospitalizations, and pain for many people, families, and the society. Our learning points is essential to use all the resources, all the health system working together. We need to work with NGOs. We need to work with municipalities in order to arrive to hard-to-reach populations. We need to put our data for all the people, available for all the people, for the researchers, for the journalists, for all the society. It's very important to focus in building capacity and improving the skills of the professionals involved. It is very important to consider the diversity of our society. And we need the industry for the vaccines, and we need them to improve some qualities of the vaccines. We ask them to make the vaccines in single doses, easier to use, and so on. And as far as COVID-19 is a pandemic, we need to work together all in a global level, because to achieve high vaccination in all parts of the world is essential to cope and to tackle this pandemic and this disease. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cabeza. You mentioned a number of really important points, including the open approach to data sharing, the fact that there was a scientific group, but also the way in which you partnered with NGOs to reach out to the migrant population are some of the key points that struck me. And now I would like to ask Dr. Cesar Hernandez, if he is available online, to talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you have faced in making vaccines available and distributed to people, as you have really walked along the journey from your perspective. Dr. Hernandez, the floor is yours, and good to see you. We don't yet hear you. Can you check your audio? Now we hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say good afternoon to everyone, and many thanks for the invitation, and apologies for not having able to manage to be there in Barcelona. What I would like to share with you is what I think was an incredible journey from the very beginning. I mean, as a regulatory agency, we were not supposed to be engaged in distribution, for example, of the vaccines, even in the purchase of the vaccine. But early on this pandemic, on April 2020, we received a mandate to prepare some plan to get access to the potential vaccines that at that time we even didn't know if it would be to be possible to have it available. And we we prepared this plan. I mean, first of all, we need to support the vaccine development, trying to be open to any clinical trial or any investigation in that field. We need to be prepared to give access. I will come back later to this. We need to prepare different needs and scenarios with the public health authorities from the government and the regions. We needed to promote the production capacity and to explore any possibility to increase the production capacity here in Spain. And we thought that it was very, very important to build international alliance with other regulators. I mean, for sure, the regulation is highly harmonized in Europe, but even with other regions in the world, but also to build an alliance to have a common strategy for access in the EU. We thought at that time, and I was referring to April 2020, that it was very, very, very important. And I have tried to summarize the journey from January to November this year in this slide. I mean, you can see in the bottom part of the slide, you know, how the genome of the virus was released on January 2020. Then the preclinical studies commenced. You can see here in the upside the first news on for example, the Moderna vaccine, always in the economic journals, not in the health press, but I mean, and as early as May. And we have the phase 1-2 clinical trials begin. In August, the phase 2-3 clinical trials, the rolling review submission to the regulators in October. And then we have the first emergency use authorization in some countries, and in Europe, the first authorization of community in December. And then Spikevax, and then Bacteria, and then the vaccine from Janssen. And on May and June, the authorization for those from 12 to 18 years, and then the authorization of the boosters, and probably in the future in November, later this year or early 2022, we will have the approval for the children. In the upside, you can see, I mean, these bars represent the percentage of the Spanish population fully vaccinated, so 2 doses of the vaccine, and how it increased from January to November, when we have reached almost 90% of the target population fully vaccinated with the vaccine. You can see here that I mean, this was a very important hallmark or milestone for us. I mean, this is the first lady vaccinated in Spain. From our point of view, it was very important to be prepared and to get this result that is really good, as Carmen has mentioned, that we need to inspect 5 plants in Spain, and we have approved 20 clinical trials on vaccines. Even more important than this, that is remarkable, and we are prepared for other achievements, is that we have started our commitments for donations, and you can see the yellow line here, up to 50 million doses right now in November. And more importantly, we have already 23 million doses allocated to the recipient countries through COVAX. I think I have to say that this was only possible because of the EU strategy. I mean, the way we created this strategy was I mean, was very exciting for me to be part of this. And the idea was to accelerate the development of the production. It was important to decide on to have a wide portfolio. On June last year, we didn't know what of the vaccines were going to be successful, although in the end, the mRNA vaccines have been the background of the vaccination campaigns because of different issues. At that time, we really didn't know if they are going to work at all. So it was, I think, very important to change to our mind to this wide portfolio. We put the focus on the EU production with a harmonized EU regulation, trying to have equitable access all through Europe, but also to guaranteeing the access to third countries. And in all the purchase agreements that have been signed by the European Commission in the name of the member states, we have these clauses for donation and resale. It was important to share risks among all the countries in the EU through these advanced purchase agreements, but also to have this kind of emergency support instrument that allow us to dedicate 2.7 billion euros in 2020 in advance to any any knowledge on the final outcome of the vaccines. And also was very important that we decide to have this portfolio and this number of vaccines to cover any event. So in the event, and when you have to take this decision, you don't know really what you are going to face in the future, but the need for booster, for to adapt the vaccine to variants, or to vaccinate the children. I mean, things that even right now it is not completely understood how to do it. And I think this is my last slide. I think this is very important to remark, and you can see this in the this has been taken from the dashboard of UNICEF, and represent all the donations of the European Union to third countries. As you can see, the countries in the European Union have been providing many vaccines, in our case, to South America, more in the future for Africa and other countries in Asia. So I think it's important to understand that the objective is not to be vaccinated at the local level, but at the worldwide level. My take-home messages would be that, I mean, this is not me, obviously, but that nobody is safe until everyone is safe. And we really rely on COVAX as a worldwide instrument to deploy this capacity of production on vaccines, and this capacity on development of clinical trials and clinical investigation that really should serve all the world to solve this pandemic. I think it is important to reach agreements to increase the production in other regions, not only Europe, but to have closer places for manufacturing in other continents. I think it's very important for everyone to understand for the future that it is completely different. The way we need to be prepared for something that we don't know if it's going to happen or not, but that may have the negative consequences that this pandemic has had over all the societies, and to separate this from what is regular access. When you have regular access to medicines, to vaccines, I mean, the first thing that you need is evidence. In this case, what you need is to be prepared for something that is unknown, and that you cannot be sure how it's going to behave. So it is important to have this in mind, because I mean, the way we are supporting these vaccines should be different, completely different than the way we support the development and the access to other medicines. Although, and I have to say, there has been many lessons learned from this COVID experience that should also be applied in the future to other medicines. And I think that a key factor of success is that everyone should get involved in this, from the industry, the governments, the regulators, the distribution, the manufacturers, the regional, for example. And I think that, for example, in Spain, and it has been already mentioned by Carmen, a key factor of success was the implication of any single piece of the puzzle at the regional level, at the local level, to be able to deploy this immense vaccination campaign. And I think that this should be one of the lessons learned for the future, in order to be prepared for another health emergencies that hopefully are not so have not so bad consequences as this COVID-19 pandemic has had. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hernandez, for really sharing with us in a very open and transparent way your personal journey through this process, the fact that the agency had to go outside its comfort zone, embrace a different way of working because of the uncertainty, and really for showing us that it was very possible for Spain to do everything to get a high vaccination rate within the country and at the same time not neglect the international solidarity. So I think that this is really a marvelous case study and experience to be documented. And now perhaps I would like to ask our colleagues to please air the statement from Dr. Ken Gasong. And we're very grateful that we have the statement, even though he couldn't be here with us. So is it possible to have the video, please?
I was asked to provide an update on the COVID situation in Africa. And in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to look at three things. I'll very briefly describe for you the epidemiological situation of COVID in Africa, discuss the vaccine updates, and then end up with some takeaway messages. So first of all, let's start with the epidemiological situation. As of the 28th of October, the continent of 1.2 billion people have reported 8.4 million cases of COVID. And of that number, 218,000 have died and 7.8 million recovered. The graph you see on the upper panel there shows the three waves that have occurred on the continent. The first wave occurred in June, July of last year, the second wave towards the end of the year, and then the third wave occurred just recently between June and August. If you now zoom in into the third wave more clearly, and I would just like you to focus for 1 second in the rectangle, which represents the third wave. It shows you the severity of that wave, which lasted between June the 1st and September 29. During that time frame, about 3.4 million new cases of COVID were reported, of which about 79,000 died, representing 41% of all cases and 37% of all deaths. So where are we with the vaccination in Africa? As a continent of 1.2 billion, and as Africa CDC, we've recognized that vaccines plus vaccinations is equal to life saved and economy saved. We early on last year, to be very exact, on August 20th, established a target of 60% immunization. That required that would enable us to immunize about 800 million people on our continent, and that will require 1.6 billion doses of vaccines. More recently, the World Health Organization has shifted the target to 70%, but that now means that we have to adjust our target in terms of number of vaccines needed to 1.8 billion doses. And that will enable us to vaccinate at least 900 million people. How do we get to that number? The COVAX facility, which is a multilateral mechanism supported by the WHO, the Gavi, UNICEF, and other partners, including CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, has committed to supporting us with at least 26% of those vaccines. The AVAT mechanism, which is the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, has already secured 400 million doses of vaccines, and that will enable us to vaccinate up to 31% of the population. We still have a gap of about 13% to enable us to get to the 70% full vaccination. As a continent, if you compare the number of people that have been vaccinated with the rest of the world, as a continent, we stand at 7.5% compared to the numbers you see on the screen, either in North America, Southern America, in Brazil specifically, in China and other places there. So Africa has a long way to go to get to the 70% vaccination target. And this slide just shows you in another format where we are compared to the rest of the world. Africa is that little bar that you see at the end there that are highlighted in red. So as a continent, as of this week, we have been supplied with about 276 million doses of vaccines, of which 189 million have been administered from 54 countries. Collectively, the continent has immunized fully only 5.5% of its total population. We now, of course, have a need to work hard to get to both the COVAX supplies as well as the AVAS supplies. And that means that we are in need of an additional 1 billion doses of vaccines. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the important contribution and support, extraordinary leadership from the Afri-Exim Bank in making available the initial funding through the AVAT mechanism to support the acquisition of the 400 million doses of vaccines. If we have to do boosters, then of course the situation will increase dramatically in 2003 and 2024. But as we speak as of today, our main goal is to make sure that we at least achieve our target of immunizing up to 70% of the population. Vaccine hesitancy is not the problem here. We see here people in Morocco, Rwanda, Zimbabwe all line up and waiting for their vaccine. So the key challenge we have for the continent is access to vaccines, and I'll add to that predictable access to vaccines. This is a video that I took in Morocco that shows people in a sports complex line up waiting to be vaccinated. These were long lines that went inside the stadium and went winded up outside of the stadium. So again, speaking to the fact that if vaccines are available, our young people will be ready to have those vaccines. These are scenarios, people sitting in Zimbabwe and Rwanda waiting to be vaccinated. The AVAT mechanism, as I stated, supplies vaccines not just to Africa, but also to some Caribbean countries. As of October 28, a total of 11 million doses of AVAT vaccines have been shipped to 29 member states, and the countries are listed on your right-hand side. These are pictures that shows the vaccines arriving in different airports from the AVAT donations or supplies from Togo, Botswana, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Lesotho, Zambia, all waiting at the airport to receive the African Vaccines Initiative. We recognize that for Africa to fight the next pandemic, it needs to engage in vaccine manufacturing. So on the 12th and 13th of April, the Africa CDC hosted a huge conference where 40,000 participants joined from 70 countries across the world to discuss how the continent should manufacture vaccines. At that meeting, President Kagame, the president of Rwanda, said this, and I quote, "Vaccine equity cannot be guaranteed by goodwill alone, as we have seen many examples to convince all of us. Africa needs to expand production capacity and other essential medical products," end of quote. At the meeting, President Tshisekedi, who is the chair of the African Union now, launched a partnership for African vaccine manufacturing. That partnership strives to narrow a gap where we currently import 99% of our vaccines, and we want to make sure that countries that are now on board, either the Senegal, Morocco, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, all in the process of manufacturing vaccines, so that the next pandemic will be fought very differently. Companies like Pfizer and biotech have now engaged with South Africa to develop vaccine production hubs in South Africa. And this is more recently on October 26 in Rwanda, where biotech has initiated or will initiate the construction of vaccine manufacturing facilities there and in Rwanda and in Senegal. Several countries in Africa do produce vaccines, not necessarily COVID vaccines, but other vaccines, and they are listed here. Our goal is to make sure that we move from a scenario where we import 99% of vaccines to actually importing less than that, about 40%, and ourselves manufacture 60% locally. So what are some of the take-home messages here? We need a new public health order for Africa, a new public health order for Africa that has 4 pillars, that will strengthen our public health institutions and national public health institutes, strengthen workforce development, expand vaccine manufacturing, diagnostics, and therapeutics, and really work on respectful, action-oriented partnerships. In this period, we have authored several papers, including recently in the news bulletin of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, where we are showing that homegrown solutions are very important, that we need to regionalize our efforts and support regional efforts that can actually guide us to achieve our new public health order. I thank you so much for this opportunity to present at this summit, and sincerely regret that I couldn't be in Barcelona a city that I like so much to present and meet with you all and discuss this important topic.
We are very grateful to Dr. Ken Gasong for taking the time really to record this very important video. I think that has also given us an important perspective from another continent and set out some of the key challenges. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to a colleague of mine, Dr. Sif Malou Nielsen. Sif, the floor is yours, and Sif has been working a lot on the topic of vaccine uptake. And today I asked her to focus on healthcare workers and what role they play in encouraging vaccine uptake, given that you here are leaders very much of the hospital healthcare workforce. Sif, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a true pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here and present in a 3D format. It's even more grateful for me to actually see the participant in front of me. It's been a while since this was actually possible, but I think this is also a great example of how far we have come in regards to the COVID-19 vaccine uptake. And I also want to say thanks for the event organizer to have invited me and giving me this opportunity to share some insights from the work that I have done over the last couple of years, supporting country with COVID-19 vaccine introduction, and especially how we can increase the uptake of the vaccine. So, and specifically in regards to what Natasha just mentioned, I'm here to share some insights on the important role that healthcare workers, they do play in regards to the COVID-19 vaccine uptake. They do play an extremely important role. We know that due to several reasons. We all know that there's a unique situation that we have all been in over the last couple of years, and it's not to compare with any other new vaccine introduction. So, and especially in regards to the healthcare workers, we in this situation have expected that the healthcare workers, they do get the vaccine themselves. There's been a push for them to get the vaccine first. We also want the healthcare workers to be promoting the vaccine, and we also want the healthcare workers to be the one that procure the vaccine, so those that actually do give the vaccine to the general population. Based on evidence, we know that healthcare workers, they are still the most trusted source when it comes to vaccination decision-making. We have conducted several behavioral insight studies in many member states in the European region since we have introduced the COVID-19 vaccine, and we still get the response that the healthcare workers are those that they are trusted the most in regards to the COVID-19 vaccine introduction. So this is just an example of that healthcare workers, they do play a tremendous important role in this regards. So data also shows that healthcare workers actually, overall, in average, have a high uptake of the COVID-19 vaccines. But in some member states, especially in the European region, we still do see gaps among healthcare workers, and specifically among nurses, where there's still a low uptake. In some countries, less than 50%. So there's still room for improvement. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is an extremely complex situation, right? So imagine like 10, 15, 20 years ago, healthcare workers, they did have an advantage in the fact that they received all the information prior to the general population. Now the news are out there, so they get the news at the same time as the general population, fellow colleagues. They listen to social media as well, and we all know there's a lot of misinformation out there. So they are also influenced by peers, supervisors, media, by patients as well also. So we still have to figure out how to work with the healthcare workers, how to support them, how to make them feel confident in the vaccine, for them to be able to actually recommend and convince the general population why it's so important to get the vaccine. I have a social science background, so I know that there are 3 major factors that have an influence on people's behavior in general. And in regards to the vaccine, behavior, That could be either the patient and or the healthcare workers themselves. We know that there's 3 factors, and it's motivation, it's opportunity, and it's capability. Capability is about knowledge. Do they have the right knowledge, or is there a knowledge gap? The opportunity is like the access. So do they have access to the vaccine? Is it convenient? Is it easy for them to get it? And that actually goes independent of whether you're healthcare workers yourself or a general population. And then it's motivation. Do you believe in the vaccine yourself? If you have those 3 factors in place, we know that then that increases the opportunity for either healthcare workers to get the vaccine themselves or even recommend it to the patients. So it's all about building confidence among the healthcare workers. We also know, based on evidence and research that I've conducted in many member states in the European region, that all the healthcare workers that I have spoken with, I've conducted a lot of interviews with them, say they are all willing to support the vaccines, but then they also report back on barriers in regards for them either to get the vaccine themselves and or promote it to the general population. We also have to listen to the healthcare workers. So what is actually the issue? Often when we talk about low vaccine uptake, we equalize with saying it's a vaccine hesitancy. They just don't want to get the vaccine. And again, it's the same for healthcare workers and in general population. You cannot just say just because there's a low vaccine uptake among a certain population group that it's hesitancy. So what we hear is that often they're willing to get the vaccine, but there's a lot of other barriers for them to actually get the vaccine and or promote the vaccine. That could be system related, that they don't have, the right support from supervisors. Maybe they lack information, maybe they lack training, and maybe they even find it inconvenient to go and get the vaccine themselves. We have examples for healthcare workers that were asked to go and get the vaccine during work hours. But in some countries, and specifically a European version I'm working in, that's just not easy because they work nonstop, 8-10 hours. And after working hours, they have a family to take care of. So it's all about figuring out what is the issue in that specific country or even in that specific context. So this is just to say that it's extremely important to acknowledge the healthcare workers' role in this regard. We all know the healthcare workers have been under tremendous pressure, but we also have to listen to them, and we also have to support them throughout. And there's, for sure, great opportunity, but there are still gaps where we have to zoom in and figure out what can be done in the future and here now to increase the low uptake of the COVID-19 vaccine introduction. So that was my key message, that we have to support, we have to acknowledge, we have to build confidence, and that could be done in many reasons, but it needs to be context-specific because you have your own situation wherever you live in the entire world, or in my regards, the European region. So happy to share my insights and happy to answer questions in the plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sif, and I think that you have left us with this MOC, motivation, opportunity, capability. These are the 3 things to think about. And actually, just listening to you also took me back to the excellent video statement we had in one of our earlier plenaries from our colleague responsible for the rollout of the vaccination campaign in the US, and I think one of the things he emphasized was really taking vaccination points to wherever people are. And now I come to our last panelist. I come to Greg. And Greg, being, of course, our representative from the industry, there has been, of course, quite a lot of criticism, but I would like to ask you to talk about what is happening in terms of partnerships between regulators and industry. What has been done and what remains to be done, particularly around the work that you are doing to get vaccines to those parts of the world where we see that the rates are still fairly low. Over to you, Greg, and thank you for making the time to join us.
Yes, and Thank you very much for the invitation, and indeed, apologies that I couldn't be there in person. So, buona tarda, and buenas tardes to everybody who's there in Barcelona. I'd like to kick off with emphasizing that the industry, from the beginning of the pandemic, had indicated quite strongly that it was committed to equitable access, to affordability, and to solidarity, and not seeing this as business as usual. And I believe that has been consistent throughout since the beginning of the pandemic. And as you'll see from figures that I'll present, there has been a massive production of these new vaccines. 14 of them now have been approved, and there's still 143 candidate vaccines in the pipeline, by the way, but 14 approved, and the first set obviously approved even before the year was out. So we have had this massive production, which I'll show you. But I want to emphasize one thing, that this has been massive production whilst trying to maintain existing production lines in vaccines and maintaining supplies of treatment throughout the world by this industry, by other parts of industry. And this has been done, and I want to stress this, in partnership. And I think one of the greatest lessons we're going to learn from this pandemic is the amazing importance and the sense of partnership which has been generated and has enabled, for example, this conference to take place. I actually had doubts about whether this conference could actually take place in person at this time of the year. But I think, as one of the other speakers has said, it's actually a tribute to the partnership which has existed at global, regional, national level in getting us where we are. So what I want to just show in these first few slides is the production of vaccines which has taken place and the partnerships that have enabled us to get there.
We seem to have lost your sound, Greg.
Okay. I want to show you the state of production that has taken place in these vaccines. So remembering that we come from a period of 0 to what is going to be 12 billion doses by the end of this year. This is an unprecedented story in production of vaccines ever in public health. And as you see, there's been a steady increase, month by month, quarter by quarter, to reach this expected figure of 12 billion by the end of the year. And we expect to have some 24 billion doses by mid next year, which is reaching the targets that the international community need in order to be able to vaccinate some 60% of the population. How was that achieved? That was achieved by a number of initiatives. First, I think it's important to indicate this was achieved by companies that had invested themselves, as well as getting public investment, invested in themselves, and long-term prior innovation, for example, in mRNA technology, which seems to be new to everyone, but it has been, of course, highly invested in the past. And that has been based on the importance of around having a strong intellectual property structure that has enabled these investments to take place. But the other key part, of course, is around partnerships. We have seen, the slide has jumped, but we have seen in vaccines, for example, we have over 300 agreements in vaccine production. And some 80% of those actually cover tech transfer. So there's a concern that's out there that somehow industry is not sharing and is not working with others, and that's simply not the case. There is substantial amount of partnerships and a substantial amount of tech transfer that has gone on. We can also see this in the therapeutic side. Again, there has been partnerships and tech transfer, and in fact, the first registered treatment for COVID ended with a 127 geographical agreement with Indian generic companies from the innovator to ensure that there would be wider distribution of the products. We've just heard an announcement recently of MSD, for example, with the medicines patent pool, showing another example over 100 countries where there will be voluntary licensing agreements. And what was recently announced as well, for example, medicines patent pool in discussions with Pfizer. And there's also been a whole series of bilateral agreements. So the industry has worked on the basis of partnership and worked towards ensuring that there is a diverse as possible distribution of manufacturers. Now, obviously, you have to go through an extreme amount of due diligence. One company, for example, looked at some nearly 100 companies and ended up with 10. Yeah, because you have to ensure that those that you are working with, have the capacity, the long-term capacity, to be able to produce on mass scale. They have a history of quality, safety, and efficacy. That they are able to absorb the technology transfer. And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings that has been around tech transfer, one just assumes that you can sort of like put it on the website or send it in a package. No, it doesn't work like that. Especially in the complicated products like vaccines, you have to have a group of experts that is sent by the originator company to work with the licensed company so as to train the people on the ground on how to use and how to develop the technologies. And that has all taken place, and that has all taken place in a very short period of time with quite exceptional results. Now, where there are concerns, and quite rightly, is around distribution and around access. And we heard from Dr. John in Africa how we only have some 7% of the African continent which have been fully vaccinated. And there are figures, for example, only 15 out of the 54 countries have been able to vaccinate 10% of their population targeted by the end of September. So there are problems that we all recognize around distribution and access. But distribution requires a number of things. It requires having a strong and integrated agencies that are able to purchase and procure the products. And of course, we've seen a great advancement with COVAX. It's a new instrument. One can say that it's based on experience, for example, in HIV and the Global Fund, but it's a relatively new organization that is established and has had to take on a substantial amount of work and integrating a whole series of different partners in that. We need to ensure that there is on the ground the ability and absorption rates on the ground of countries to take on the vaccines. There obviously has to be vaccine education, and there has to be strong regulatory ability internationally, regionally, and nationally to be able to approve these products. And that's why when we looked at the production and we look at the access, we've got to remember that the production was focused in countries with high regulatory standard. We needed to start our production in those countries that could give, for example, FDA approval in the USA or MHRA approval in the UK or the EMA approval in Europe. These also had to be countries in which there were, as I said, high regulatory standards, best sites that are possible and readily available and adaptable. So the ability to do this globally is based on a lot of factors. And also, a lot of the distribution obviously started in those countries which had the highest rates of prevalence, which was in fact the US, the EU, and the UK. I think some interesting figures that come out of this, coming back to looking at production, is that the vast majority of production does actually take place in developing countries. As was mentioned by Dr. John, even in Africa, we were able to undertake tech transfer agreements, and we have J&J's one of its principal manufacturing sites for fill and finish is in South Africa, and there has been progress that's been made there. If in the future we were to do more in a continent like Africa, we would have to have built more advanced manufacturing sites than is the case now, and that is something, again, Dr. John made quite clear that for the African Union, they wish to look at long-term production in Africa. So there are a whole series, I think, of issues that have shown success, shown where we still need to work on. And the clear thing now is, and just coming back to your question, what we need to do now is look at redistributing doses which have been committed through donations. And I'd like to thank and congratulate the European Union for the work that they have done in that area, as well as the United States. We need to look at that. We need to ensure that we can maintain the supply through COVAX and through various individual agreements within the African Union, for example, through power in Latin America. And this industry is committed, is working with organizations that I've mentioned, including with COVAX, to seek to improve the scale and the speed at which we can distribute those vaccines that we have, which are committed to other parts of the world. So as an event like this that is taking place in Barcelona in Europe can, for example, take place in other parts of the world where it currently would not be possible, and where everybody will have the access to the vaccines that are needed. And as everyone has stated before, no one's safe until everybody is safe, and that is a commitment that this industry has. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg, for sharing the figures, for sharing the work that is being done, for giving us some insights. And I mean, I think we do have to acknowledge that having 24 billion doses by mid-next year is something unprecedented and has taken a whole lot of effort to achieve. So far, I have 3 responses that have come in. I would like to once again remind you to use the Q&A to send through any questions or comments. And perhaps, as I will start with a second short round of brief questions to our panelists, perhaps this one more for Cesar and Greg. We have a comment about the TRIPS agreement. Is it time to have something specifically for vaccines, or what should change? And then we have somebody who's actually been very much influenced by the video statement we had from Africa, and I'm sure the colleagues will make the necessary contacts to find ways to donate through the other mechanisms that have been mentioned besides CEPI and COVAX. And another question that has come in that maybe one or more panelists might wish to address, but perhaps I would ask Dr. Cabeza to think a little bit about this, is what is needed in order to step up advocacy for vaccines to move to lower income countries? What can health systems, associations, us as individuals do more than we have done so far? Is it a question that we haven't raised sufficient awareness about the issue? And a video statement like the one we have just seen from the African Director for CDC can sometimes also be quite a potent instigator. So let me perhaps start by coming once again to you, Dr. Cabeza. Having heard now from other colleagues from the industry, what other reflections would you wish to share with us? And I'm perhaps particularly intrigued in the way you have really managed to balance looking after the needs of your domestic population and at the same time ensuring that your country really does its role when it comes to international solidarity.
Yes, I think that it's very important to assure that all the population of our country, of Catalonia in this case, receive the vaccines and receive especially these people that is in more necessity. But also I think that it's very important to have this broad view and to collaborate with all the other countries, and not only through donation of the vaccines that is available here or is in excess here, but also in a more planned point of view in order to share from the beginning the amounts of vaccines that is needed in order to achieve this 60% coverage in all the countries in the world. I think it's very important that, and I think that we need to share this point of view from the beginning of the planification and so on the planning phase.
Thank you very much. So I think the key point over here is that the solidarity needs to be part of our national plans up front, and that we need to ensure that we build this into our forecasts and provisions. Thank you very much for that perspective. So perhaps, Dr. Hernandez, where are the gaps that still need to be addressed? This morning in an earlier plenary, we were looking at building resilience, and we focused very much more on hospitals. But if we had to do better next time, when the next pandemic comes along, as it surely will, we don't know whether it will be a virus, whether it will be AMR. What would you like to see perhaps being done earlier, better, or different?
Thank you for the question. I think that the key element is to understand that when we are talking about antimicrobial resistant future pandemics, we are talking about something that is different than the way we used to purchase and develop and approve medicines. So we need to learn how to be prepared for that. And in order to do that, you need for sure some kind of a sleeping structure that is able to rapidly move to solve the needs that you have. We need the science prepared. We need the scientific people doing the work, but ready to jump into the next challenge and to address in a very fast way. And then we have to have the industry that are the ones who really wants to, really knows how to do this, ready to at a certain point to change a little bit the direction of their production to be able to cope with this kind of situations. And I think that it's important to understand that to do that, we need to find a model of financing or funding this research, this sleeping structure of able to rapidly move to solve our needs. Because otherwise, and I think this is important, if you create, for example, a center for vaccination, it doesn't matter if it is in Africa or in Spain, and this center needs to be there for the next, hopefully, I would say 10 years, 100 years, in order to be able to solve this kind of centers, this kind of research needs a stable model of funding so they can, be able to respond when we have the emergency, But in the meantime, they have also to find a way to have updated the structures, updated manufacturing facilities that really, in a very short time, can make this change. And I think that it is important that this kind of preparedness, and I hope that HERA in Europe, for example, may help, should be prepared in advance without knowing what is going to come in the future.
Thank you. So I think there's a very clear message there that although we may all well be exhausted by the time we see the end of this pandemic, it's not the time to let our guard down, but it would be the time to really make sure that we have the structures and systems in place based on the lessons that we have learned. And I very much hear your call for financing and dedicated financing, and we hope that the movements that we are seeing with relation, for example, also a few days ago we heard that the G20 will be setting up a task force of health and finance ministers to really look into how we can strengthen the preparedness, could be the start perhaps of some promising initiatives. Sif, I was going to come to you earlier, perhaps, to tell us a little bit more about the experience that you have had in a country, on the ground, the difference that it could make when healthcare workers are not perhaps so much vaccinated themselves, as opposed to other countries where the healthcare workers are really the advocates for vaccination. It would be good if you can share with us perhaps a couple of practical examples.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I would love to. And if you may allow me, I would actually like to share a very recent example. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a social scientist by background. So I travel to the country and work with them on developing tailored interventions for different target audience in regards to increasing the vaccine uptake. And often you would look at numbers, right? You will try to look at numbers to figure out, so where are the missing gaps? My recent example, I just came back from Romania last week, and I think it's not a secret that they have an increase of COVID-19 vaccine, not vaccine, but COVID-19 cases, right? So they do have an issue, and we need to figure out how we can support them. So looking at numbers, healthcare workers, 85% of the healthcare workers are actually vaccinated in Romania. Okay, so maybe that's not the issue. It's less for nurses, we know that, that's around 50%. However, we can see that there's a very low uptake among elderly, and it's also the elderly that get admitted to hospital. Those are the ones having COVID-19 now, those are the ones dying, those are the ones struggling. Okay. Elderly, they are the ones that do trust healthcare workers the most, and especially in the rural area. Where do they go? They go to their family doctors, their general practitioner, to ask for advice and to get the vaccine. But really, I mean, 85% of the healthcare workers in Romania, they're already covered. So they should, or we should assume, that they would then promote and advocate for the vaccine, right? What we figure out while we're there is that there's around 11,000 primary healthcare workers in Romania. Only 4,000 of those, approximately, have actually signed up to support the COVID-19 vaccine, right? So it's only 4,000 that actually participate in COVID-19 vaccination, right? Okay, then the question would be, is it because they feel it's an extra workload, they don't get incentives enough, they don't get extra payment, but they do. Everyone offered extra payment to actually procure the vaccine. So what's the reason then? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it lack of advocacy? What is it? They have a great medical association that have, direct channels to the GPs, family practitioners, specialists, nurses, and they feel that they communicate, at a regular basis, and they provide technical webinars, with whatever is needed. So still, what's the issue? We figure out, of course, the medical association only have 3,000 members. So again, much less than the actual primary healthcare workers that are out there. So it's just to say that numbers does give you an indication of something, but you really need to do a deep dive to understand and to be able to support and to tailor interventions. So what's actually still the issue is yet to be explored. As mentioned, I just came back actually this Friday. My colleague is still there. It's just to say that we now again have to go back and work with the primary healthcare workers to understand why they have not signed up to support COVID-19 vaccination. So the incentives are there where they'll be paid for it. However, they live in smaller community. And as I mentioned, healthcare workers are also part of the general community. So imagine if the church do not support vaccination. They still need to have this trustworthy, trust doctor-patient relationship, right? So, and if they feel that that's threatened if they support the vaccine, then they would rather be out of it. So that's the things that needs to be explored before you can tailor intervention and you can support the healthcare workers the best for them to be able to convince and push and motivate for vaccination among the general population, and in this regard, especially the elderly population. So that was one concrete example. I'm not sure if I have time for more, but otherwise I can wait and you can continue with other questions. Up to you, Natasha.
Thank you very much, Sif, for really breaking it down. And I think there's a lesson to be there that behind every average statistic, we really need to dig deeper to understand the breakdown and to understand the value of the qualitative research to accompany, to unpack those figures. But Greg, let me come back to you now. And we have one of the questions which is related to the TRIPS agreement, which is always, of course, a very sensitive issue. And I think the question is, do we need something different, something similar, something better in order to overcome some of the issues that we have seen around getting vaccines to lower middle and lower income countries? Or is it not just enough to look at that? What can manufacturing companies do more on the ground to really build the capacity? So perhaps I'd like to take your views a bit on these two questions.
Okay, let me address the TRIPS issue. For those in the audience, that's the trade and intellectual property agreement that we have internationally, which provides a requirement for protection of intellectual property to develop innovation. So there is an idea that this should be put to one side, the patent protection around vaccines and treatments. And the belief is in doing that you'll accelerate production and access. But to be honest, this is a sort of wrong solution for the wrong problem. And the reason why it's a wrong solution is because the issue that isn't about intellectual property. What we're talking about is ensuring sufficient tech transfer and having reliable manufacturing partners to be able to do that. And what I hope I was able to demonstrate before was how much tech transfer and how many partnerships have already taken place to have got us to where we are. We actually have the production targets, which at this time last year, nobody thought we would even get there. So we've actually got there by the method of voluntary licensing, tech transfer, partnership arrangements that have been done. And within that context, I think it must be, again, emphasized that already the majority of vaccine production, and that's not just obviously from our side of the industry, that includes, for example, China, is done in developing countries. And of course, there was a very significant agreement between AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute of India for vaccine production. Unfortunately, and this comes to the next part about the solution, unfortunately, what happened there, of course, is export restrictions were put in place after the Indian pandemic got out of control. There's another discussion about how and why it got out of control. And so it leads to my second point, that what is vitally important is that we are able to maintain open trade. We're able to maintain existing supply chain routes because vaccines are dependent on a large number of different raw materials and particles to be able to do that, and that requires international trade to do that. And the second part of that is that the biggest problems we had were around issues like raw materials, syringes, bags, packs, safety controls. So despite the speed in which we've been doing this, there have been like parts of the supply chain haven't been able to keep up. So if you had actually introduced a system in which you so-called liberated the IP, firstly, it wouldn't solve the main problems. It wouldn't solve the problems of the raw materials or the tech transfers. It would have no impact whatsoever. And the real problem that has existed from, at least from a production side, has related to those issues of raw materials. But we've been able to overcome that and we've got where we are. But the real problem, as we're seeing, isn't about the amount that we're producing. It's about making sure that they are redistributed and that there is access on a geographical scale. Now, the second part of your question related to manufacturing and where that exists globally. Now, I've mentioned that the vast majority of vaccines that are being produced in developing countries. And we have seen that there has been production, at least at fill and finish, which is a significant part of vaccine production, for example, in the African continent. But there is one issue that is very important, and I think that is to do with what is known as health security and the issue related to geographical distribution. And I know that the frustration and the anger and the aspirations in Africa is that there must be more manufacturing capacity in Africa. So as when there is a new pandemic that comes about, and I think everybody sort of agrees that at one point that we're going to face something similar again. Africa is in a place to be able to do more than it has done and can do at the moment in manufacturing. And this is why the Africa CDC has initiated something called the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, which is looking to reach those targets of 60% of Africa's needs in vaccination by the, I think it's 2040. It is a very ambitious target. And companies individually, as we have seen, are already moving towards that sort of partnership agreement. And we had an announcement recently by one of the new technology companies, Moderna, about, they will set up a manufacturing plant in Africa. Where that is to be is yet to be seen. Obviously, that's a significant, a major significant decision from a business point of view. And they will do a lot of due diligence about where that is. I think we're at the early days of that. And companies will operate differently. But where there are a proper environment, where there are incentives, where there are skilled workforces, where there are strong regulatory mechanisms, all these things are vitally important. Dr. John has mentioned that. We may be able to see, without making any commitments, companies have to make those decisions. We may well see a more geographically dispersed manufacturing for vaccines in the future. And that, for example, would reassure that within Africa, at least it has to be assured that within Africa there is free movement. There will be more local production of vaccines to meet the needs when that happens. But this is really one of the key lessons that may be learned from that. And if I may, it's not a question to me, but I do want to raise a point here about lessons learned. Also, within that, one of the lessons learned is, do we invest enough in health? Do we invest enough in our health systems? And I think when we look, not just within Europe, that question could be asked about, do we do enough? Obviously, that is being asked very strongly in African countries, for example, where the investment as part of GDP or government expenditure is well below the targets in vast majority of countries. One of the lessons learned is if we need to build, health structures, we need to invest in them. And it's where we've seen where there's been stronger health structures, we've been able to see a greater distribution of vaccines and a greater response. Where they've been weaker, it's obviously been a lot less. So those things have to be taken into account as well.
Absolutely, Greg, and thank you very much. And of course, investment and the need to ensure that we continue investing even after the pandemic is hopefully behind us. There's just one last question coming in, which I would like to direct to Sif before asking all the panelists to leave us with a tweet-sized take-home message for you to take to your coffee breaks. But Sif, in the presentation we saw from Dr. John, we saw queues of people lining up for the vaccine. We have a question that has come in saying that vaccine hesitancy, anti-vax behaviors are also becoming problematic within lower income countries, Africa in particular. What is the message when we want to now increasingly target vaccine uptake in the younger population?
So thank you so much. I think I will again then emphasize that exactly we have to be careful equalizing that just because people, they don't show up for vaccination, it's due to vaccine hesitancy. So SAGE provided us with a definition of vaccine hesitancy, and they showed this continuum. So we know that, the far majority, referring to vaccine hesitancy, they are actually not rejecting vaccination. That's only few percentage, those that really are not keen on getting the vaccine. But quite a lot, and that's what we experience now, correctly enough, and it's not only in low income countries, it's also in high income countries and middle income countries, where we somehow have reached a plateau where there are people that do not want to get the vaccine. But again, it's not necessarily due to being hesitancy. It's often that they do need a push, and that push, of course, could be making sure that they get the right messages in regards to the vaccine, but it could also be trying to understand, and especially when we talk about young people, what's the reason that they do not show up? Do we need to make it much more convenient for them again? Who do they trust, the young people? Maybe that's not the general practitioner as such. Maybe it's friends, maybe it's peers, maybe it's influencers, bloggers, that do not necessarily write about vaccination and or health, but care about fashion and or any other topic that young people are interested in, or musicians or actors. So maybe those are the ones we have to work with to actually reach the young people where they are at. So I think then my take comments would be really keep in mind that one size do actually not fit all. And so we have to explore and literally understand what's the reasons behind, for instance, in this case, the young people do not show up for vaccination.
Thank you. And in the last couple of minutes to wrap up, I will start by our gentlemen online and come back to the ladies here in the hall. Your 30-second message to the audience. Cesar, I start with you, followed by Greg.
Well, thank you. I think this is the pandemic has happened for many, many years since the beginning of the world. But I think this is the first time that happened in a global world. So we have tested our resilience and the resilience of the global world, and we just need to extract the lessons learned from this experience and try to move forward. I agree very much that one of the major or most important lessons is probably we need to increase our investment in health to be prepared for the future for new pandemics, new health challenges, and this can only be done if we stay together and work together with this objective.
Thank you. Very positive message. Greg?
A bit the same, really. I think it's shown the importance of innovation. It's shown the importance of partnership. shown the importance of having strong health systems and the need to invest in those systems, and also, as we mentioned, the importance of human resources and people, and particularly healthcare workers. And I think all of us who have been involved personally one way or another in this pandemic, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's worked so hard in getting us where we are today, within the companies, within the regulatory authority, the ministries, but particularly I think we all agree with that, with the healthcare workers, and I think they deserve a lot more than they're currently doing. And I heard today on French radio how nurses are dropping out of the profession after COVID-19 and feel like there's no future, no proper reward financially or whatever, and that has to be addressed. That cannot continue.
Thank you. Sif?
Yeah, and I very much agree with your latter point there, Greg. I think in general we have come extremely far, and I also think that we have to acknowledge those that have been supporting not only the initial phase of the pandemic, but also now with the introduction of the vaccine. Healthcare workers are doing a tremendous job. And I very much admired what they are doing, and especially the countries that I visit. But still, I can see that there's room for improvement. And I think the take-home message is that we have to listen to our fellow colleagues. We have to understand where they're coming from, and we have to support them the best we can. That will fit them, make them feel confident in the vaccine, whether that's training, capacity building, and or making it much easier in their environment for them either to get the vaccine themselves and or promote the vaccine for patients. So again, acknowledge that it's very context specific, even within one country, but listen and acknowledge. I think that's the way forward.
Thank you. And Carmen, you opened our session, and it is right and fit that we come to you now for the closing remark.
Thank you. I think that is also important. I agree with all the other comments, but I think that it's also important to look at the social determinants of health. We have seen high differences, big differences between countries and also inside the countries. And this pandemic, this endemic, is especially hard with poor people and with the people with difficulties. And for that reason, I think that my last remark is for these people and to work in improving the conditions of living of the people. And also, the last word is to thank all the health professionals here in Catalonia that have been doing a great work for the pandemic and also especially in the vaccination campaign.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank all of you for having stayed with us, and I would ask you to join me in a round of our applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.